Welcome to this panel. The theme of this discussion is how we can replace textiles that are sources of plastic microfibers with alternatives designed to biodegrade in natural environments. I'm the moderator, Kamea Chayne, and our panelists for this session include Megan Schuknecht, Neva, Murtha, and Nicole, Rawling. I would love to start off by inviting each panelist to give brief introductions to your work and also share why you think the topic of fibers replacement as an upstream solution is so important to preventing the issue of microfiber pollution, as opposed to the more downstream solutions like recycling and cleanups. So if Megan, you want to start?
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Schuknecht. I'm a senior biomimicry professional at the Biomimicry Institute. We're a nonprofit organization that is helping people look to nature to inspire solutions to human design problems. We've done a number of consulting projects that relate to textiles. And this past summer, we published a report called The Nature of Fashion. And so I invite you to check that out. And basically, we were setting the case for how the fashion industry can function more like a healthy ecosystem. I think I forgot the first part of what you wanted me to address already. I'm sorry.
Basically, why you think it's important for us to focus on upstream solutions, such as replacing the fiber feedstock.
Okay, I got that part. I thought I missed something. But I think it's really critical that we focus on upstream solutions because no matter what, due to the second law of thermodynamics and entropy, anything that we create or bring into the textile system that is not biocompatible ultimately is going to leak out into the biosphere. So we kind of have this false idea in the circular economy that we can separate biological and technical loops, but that's not, we're all part of the biosphere and that's not the way the cycles work. And so we can try really hard to hold materials in these technical loops, but ultimately they are going to leak back out into the biosphere. And that's why I believe that addressing the problem of microfiber plastic pollution has to happen upstream, even if we can do chemical recycling and other things to get more value out of plastic shedding textiles in their next evolution. They're still going to shed, and at end of life, they are going to completely leak into the biosphere.
Neva?
Hi, everyone. I'm Neva Murtha. I'm with Canopy. We're a not-for-profit forest conservation working to protect ancient and endangered forests globally. And for the past 6 years, we've had a very successful and impactful Canopy-style initiative working with hundreds of global fashion brands, helping them protect ancient and endangered forests at source, while creating markets for viscose and rayon and man-made cellulose made from alternatives that have a lower footprint. And at Canopy, I lead our next generation solution work and have worked with many hundreds of companies actually to develop leading purchasing policies to help them protect ancient and endangered forests. And I've also led or contributed to numerous life cycle analysis looking at the footprint in the forest for different feedstocks. So I think this is a hugely important question around microfiber shedding because feedstock really is key. We've seen a lot of sort of flawed thinking around feedstock inputs around natural fibers being sustainable. But for instance, if you've got a natural forest fiber going into viscose and rayon, what's hidden in that is all kinds of biodiversity and carbon and social impacts. So looking at a lower footprint holistic solution is really key.
And Nicole?
So hi, I'm Nicole Rawling. I'm the co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit called the Material Innovation Initiative. And our focus is to use science and technology to develop new alternatives to materials traditionally sourced from animals. So leather, wool, silk, down, fur, and exotic skins. And I don't think I can add much more to your question about why it's important to focus on the feedstocks, but what I will say is that the reason we're so excited about this initiative is in the past, when we have used science and technology to create new materials, we haven't focused on the entire process, right? We haven't focused on where the feedstocks are coming from, or at end of life, what happens with washing or microfiber pollution. And so we really want to make sure that any new technologies that we help support really are environmentally friendly throughout the entire process.
So Megan, you had touched on this word circular in your response earlier. It's a word that has sort of become a buzzword. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on what it means for textiles to be circular and how biodegradability plays into this picture.
Again, our position is to think about the biosphere, right? And so to think about that ultimate end of life. And I embrace a lot of the circular economy thinking in terms of, designing for durability where appropriate, keeping things in use for longer cycles, embracing repair and reuse, a lot of those concepts. But where we have some question about some of the circular economy thinking is when it comes to this idea that we can hold technical materials in technical loops and think that they're never going to leak out into the biosphere. I think there's more analysis that needs to be done around where recycling is appropriate and to what extent recycling kind of gets put out there as a panacea, right? We could recycle our way out of this problem, and that comes to other kinds of plastic pollution as well as plastic textile pollution. But we're seeing increasing use of virgin materials, even though recycling rates have remained the same relatively the same for a number of decades. And we're only seeing more and more problems with the leakage from those technical materials out into the biosphere. So if you're truly going to emulate the way the biosphere works, the way our planet functions, then you need to consider, there's a lot of primary production that happens in biology, right? That's your first growth. And then you have several consumer cycles where consumers are eating the products of that primary production and then eating each other. And there's this interplay of materials and energy. But then ultimately, most things are decomposed, right? And then they're returned as molecules or building blocks for further primary production. And that's kind of a key piece that's missing from a lot of circular economy thinking. How can we make sure that the molecules that are put into textiles can then be reused in some form of primary production?
Neva, anything to add?
Yeah, for Canopy, because we're looking at the impacts to ancient and endangered forests and, always expanding for new fibers going into viscose and rayon, we actually see circularity as keeping what's already in the system as long as possible, recycling it into the highest and best use. And then when it does come to end of life, making sure that it's designed to decompose or biodegrade and have a low footprint that way in order to mitigate the use of new fiber from critically important ancient and endangered forests. And we actually have more than 20 Canopy style brands that have signed Canopy style vision for next generation solution viscose. And this has also got 7 viscose producers signed on to it. And this vision goes into significantly more detail about their commitments around circularity as part of this solution.
Nicole?
I was going to say, I think Canopy is more of the expert where feedstocks come in. So, we're thrilled to hear from them on their expertise. What I will say is that what we're focused on that I'm very excited about is the middle stage of the process. So taking those initial fibers that are recommended from somewhere like Canopy that we can then use through these new types of technological development. So for example, mycelium-based leather is usually using a lot of agricultural waste. And then you're taking the fungal spores to turn that waste into a material that at end of life can actually biodegrade very easily. In some cases, the materials we've heard are backyard compostable. So they can actually just go back into the soil because they are just agricultural waste and fungal spores. And so I think for us, what we're really excited about is working with all these other nonprofits to understand every expertise and how we can all work together to ensure that these materials really are good for the environment and aren't causing, unexpected problems.
So you just mentioned mycelium. When we're talking about other sorts of replacement fibers and feedstocks, I feel like Canopy probably works mostly with cellulosic fibers, but I'm curious what other up-and-coming or innovative fiber alternatives or feedstock alternatives you see that are out there right now that excite you.
So really for mycelium-based products, you can almost use anything. That's the exciting thing about those type of materials. The other technologies that we're really interested in are things like precision fermentation, which is taking the collagen. So if you're looking at an animal-based material, it's a protein. And take leather, for example, it's skin, which is 80% collagen. Collagen is that protein. The bacteria or yeast in a precision fermentation process actually uses the collagen from whatever animal, let's say bovine, to create that leather, to grow that collagen that then can be turned into a piece of skin. And so for us, that's also very exciting because the traditional synthetics that replace animal materials are generally made from petroleum-based products. And so if we can move away from those and use these more natural feedstocks, we will at least be solving that issue.
Megan or Neva?
Canopy is working on the issue of feedstocks because the research that we've seen shows that all textiles, so viscose and rayon, jeans, linen, etc., polyester, they all shed. And there's been viscose found in ocean sediment and fish and ice cores. So when we're looking at solutions, we really want to see a naturally regenerative, annually available, low footprint agricultural residue, for instance, as the feedstock instead, so that when it does shed, it biodegrades or decomposes naturally instead of, staying inert in the environment.
And Megan, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just concur with both of those responses. We're interested in those things as well. Not with as much expertise as either Nicole or Neva's organizations. There's also pretty new work in sort of air to carbon or air to stuff. So can we actually mine the air to get the molecules we need to create the things we want to develop? So a lot of that is kind of nascent technology, but there's been some early success there. So I don't know enough to fully promote it for the textile industry, but definitely an interesting place to explore, I think. But on the opposite spectrum, not sort of new materials, but we're very interested in what we might be able to do with existing natural materials or biocompatible materials. So can we get the kind of functionality we currently get from petroleum-based products and treatments and coatings? And can we look at new spinning, new weaving technologies, new blends, new ways to improve performance or get additional performance out of natural, or I should say biocompatible materials that do fit into this holistic vision of protecting the earth.
And speaking of the subject of replacing microplastic fibers with alternatives, I recently wrote an article on what re-indigenizing the fibers and textile system may look like, specifically as it has to do with reviving and looking to our marginalized, native, and place-based fibers that were traditionally used by indigenous communities in different ecoregions. Because as our demand on any one crop or plant grows, inevitably that can drive agrobiodiversity loss, and we may have to eventually convert biodiverse native ecosystems into monocultures of that homogenized crop, even if it's organic, to keep up with the demand for it. Which means that if we want to support the healing of biodiverse native landscapes, then we should also honor and value the varieties that already come from those places and learn about the fibers that different indigenous cultures have used, which are tied to those places. And so on this note, I'm curious if you have thoughts on how we can not just use natural fibers as a way to support the soil-to-soil form of circularity, but also diversifying the natural fibers that we use so that in pursuit of scalable solutions, we won't at the same time drive further biological and cultural diversity loss. Megan, if you want to start.
Well, I think there may have to be some limits to scale, right? We're always looking to scale and increase efficiency at the expense of resiliency. So I see the future of fibers and sustainable fibers as having to be, we have to take a more regional approach, and we do have to look at what is appropriate here in this place. Any healthy ecosystem, there's a context there, right? In terms of what it can sustain, what the water table is like, how much rainfall, all of these conditions. And so I do think we need to be taking that into account. And I do think that would ultimately mean we need more of a bioregional approach to textile production. I realize that's pretty challenging given our global supply chains. And so again, I'm sort of putting out, that's the ideal vision, and there's a lot of back and forth in between there. I think there's an immediate opportunity with regenerative agriculture and being able to look at growing food and fiber on existing land. So looking at places where we're already growing food, we already have land set aside for food production, and then looking at where can we incorporate fiber production into where we're already doing food production without losing without damaging the soil, or in fact, we might even be able to improve the soil that way, but certainly without causing further damage. There's also a lot of degraded land around the world, and we see that as another opportunity for, as we're looking to utilize more locally appropriate fibers, there's also this possibility of restoring land or restoring forests on land that's already degraded.
Neva?
Yeah, this is a hugely important question, and because of the scale that we're working at, scale is obviously the question, and therefore we come back to what's got the lowest footprint as a feedstock and the lowest land use change. So, to the point about agriculture and sustainability, for instance, in India, there's already millions of tons of wheat straw residue that's going unused and is being burned that could be utilized in different end uses. So Canopy's work on next gen solutions is really focused on utilizing what is currently considered a waste product that might otherwise be burned or landfilled, and keeping that in the system as long as possible. In order to address this system, also because of the scale issues, in order to solve the problems at scale that we need. So I think there's I'd love to see this very small regional approach, and just because of the nature of what we're working in, we actually mapped last year a vision for protecting ancient and endangered forests at source, regenerating forests on degraded land, and then utilizing recycled textiles and agricultural residues like wheat straw or other crop residues already in the system that are considered a waste product, and accessing that to turn it into new products that could be used in a more circular system.
And Nicole?
Actually, I wanted to bring up an example from India too. So I know this background, I haven't talked about it on this call, but I come from the food industry. So if you've heard of a lot of the replacements to traditional animal products like meat, eggs, and dairy, I was at a nonprofit that helped develop that entire industry called the Good Food Institute. And we're really using those same type of ideas now in the materials industry. And so in a long week tour, a 3-week tour I had of India, we were trying to address similar issues. We were trying to see where are local farmers moving away from moving away from current feedstocks, mostly rice and wheat, towards other things. And in India, they were going back to ancient grains like ragi. And so they only really use a small portion of the plant towards food, and then a big portion of the plant they do feed towards animals, and then another portion of the plant goes back into compost for the facilities. I think there's huge opportunities for us to look at where other industries are also growing. So like Neva mentioned, we should be looking at things like wheat. We should be looking at things like ragi. Where can we use that byproduct or that, the rest of the plant for other materials? And then I would also encourage anybody who's really thinking about applying to this competition and being involved. The way we look at this is the more competition, the better, right? Let's use the marketplace to have more entrepreneurs and more people exploring this area, because everyone will just keep feeding off of each other's ideas and competing. And I think it's just a huge, exciting opportunity for us to encourage development. And jumping a little bit on the idea of looking at indigenous fibers, I think we can pick those type of ideas from the food industry as well. And so a lot of the plant-based eggs right now come from mung beans. We really didn't use mung beans in the West for a long time, but they were very common in Asian cultures. They did make breakfast foods in India out of them that were very similar to eggs. And so I think if we start to explore, what people around the world are doing and what the properties are of those materials, we can then start using that competition and that excitement of the market to find solutions that really are circular for the materials industry.
Well, we are wrapping up, but I'd love for you to just share whatever you feel most compelled to share as final words of guidance for our viewers, innovators, and potential competition applicants. Megan, if you want to start.
Sure. I would just say I think this is a really exciting area that's ripe for innovation. I think the last 5 years we've seen, and thanks in large part to the work of Canopy too, I think we've seen a huge shift in sort of awareness of what really makes up the textile system and what the problems of microfiber pollution are. And there's more and more studies coming out every day about the implications. And so I think, legislation will eventually come down the line. There will be some crises, but we can stave that off. We know that we're going to have to shift. We know someday we're going to run out of oil anyway. And so right now is a really exciting time to innovate and to look for different solutions. We don't have to wait until we pollute the planet further, right? And I think there is going to be a large demand, just as it took a while for people to start embracing organic foods, and then it really took off. Plant-based foods, as was just mentioned, is skyrocketing, even in places where traditionally people didn't think there would be a market, in like large meat-eating countries like the United States, like Brazil. And so I think we might see the same thing with fashion. I really think there's going to be a demand for transparency and for more sustainable fashion. And now is a great time to get involved and be part of the solution.
Neva?
Yeah, so many things. So there is a lot of demand. I mean, everyone cares about the planet now, and more every day. And just in the last few months, we've identified 300,000 tons of demand from a mere 9 companies looking for man-made cellulose from next-gen solutions like sustainably sourced agriculture residues or recycled textiles. And, we've mapped a vision for millions of tons of this. And there are solutions. We've got innovation partners working on technology to recycle textiles and to make solutions out of agriculture residues. And there's huge opportunities for innovation within the entire supply chain, Also designing for longevity, really ensuring that the feedstock is the lowest feedstock possible, keeping it in the system as long as possible, improving current textile recycling systems, and collection, separation, and recycling systems, and then processing it with the lowest footprint, greenest technology possible. And innovators exist, innovations exist, and there's so much more opportunity because every innovation leads to another. So please bring on the innovations. We're excited to see them.
And Nicole?
Yeah, I think the message I'd like to get across is the same thing, is it's that opportunity in this space. So whether you're a scientist or an investor or an entrepreneur, there's huge potential. And looking at the plant-based meat space, the number of companies and scientists and investors in that space grew 1,200% within the first 3 years. So I think from 2016, 2019, it was huge. I think most people have heard of the Beyond Meat IPO. I mean, it went up over 800%. It was, the biggest IPO that year. We've talked with 37 major international fashion and automotive brands. We talked with 40, and 37 of them are actively looking for replacements for animal materials. And we're helping them behind the scenes. The solutions really don't exist, at least for the animal materials right now. The ones that are on the market that do meet the price point, that do meet the performance and aesthetic standards, do generally have petroleum-based products in them. And so there's just this huge opportunity to develop new products that really meet industry needs. And investors are also extremely excited about this. If I can tell one quick story, I had one company that's not public about their work. They asked us for help in raising $1 million round. We introduced them to a number of VCs. They closed that round in 5 days. We had VCs coming to us afterwards. There's about 6 that wanted to be in for $100,000 and couldn't because they delayed on the meeting. They weren't able to get in. So there's a lot of money and potential in this space.
Well, that is a wrap for this panel on replacement fiber and feedstock solutions. Thank you so much, Megan, Neva, and Nicole, for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.